All right, part two of our college football preview. We're going to dive right into it. Let's go to the Pac-12, who doesn't have 12 teams soon to be, but for now, no changes have been.
Soon to not have any team.
For now, the Pac-12 is what it was last year. That's all that matters. So USC and family are still around in the Pac-12 for this year. Its final year. So let's get into it. Mike, who do you think is going to win the Pac-12? And then we'll get into our overs, unders, and bottom.
Um, this is just a square pick, but I have USC.
I do
Uh,
too.
their odds are plus 195. Returning Heisman winner. They'll be better on defense. They got a couple transfers in, one from I believe Texas and Bear Alexander, who was starting on Georgia's defense last year to help with the defensive line because that was obviously their biggest problem. Um, if Caleb Williams stays healthy, this should not only be the Pac-12 champ, but they should be a playoff team. Like they should just be able to outgun everybody. Caleb Williams was insane last year and should be again. They do lose Jordan Addison out wide, but they've got enough skill guys. And Lincoln Riley's offense is always going to put up points. So I it's feels easy, it feels simple. There's a bunch of teams that are contending, which makes this a little bit more difficult. Um, but overall, I think USC is just too. This is their year. They're too talented. They go to the Big Ten next year and have a lot more to deal with. There's a little bit of urgency here, even though they have Malachi Nelson behind Caleb Williams ready to step in next year. This is their best chance in a long time to make the playoff. I think more than anybody else, more than like the Florida States or the Texases. USC has the pressure on them. I think as an internal expectation to make the playoff this year. Um,
100%.
so I go with I think they get it done. The back half of their schedule was not easy. I will say that.
No, I was about to
Um,
talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, starting on October 15th, they go or October 14th, they go to Notre Dame. Then they get Utah at home. They can go beat up Cal, but then they get Washington at home, at Oregon, UCLA at home. Those are all difficult games. So overall, it's not simple, but I do think they weather the storm here. They may lose a game or two, but maybe if they lose one game, I think they still make the playoff 10-2. They're going to need some help, but overall, this is Caleb Williams' season to go get his team in the playoff, go be the first two-time Heisman winner since uh, Archie Griffin, and I think that they get it done. So I'm high on USC this year, just because I'm high on Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. So give me USC.
Yeah, I kind of did a little bit of a reversal from maybe some takes last year. I think they have demonstrated their proficiency as a team, really. Um, the you saw kind of last year, like Tulane. They lost the Cotton Bowl to Tulane basically on an insane series of flukes. Not that that takes away from Tulane at all, but like they just got unlucky in some cases, and I think that kind of invigorates you a loss like that as well. So I think USC comes out of the gate like firing, right? Like they're going to beat up on two teams, three teams, four teams, like in the first couple weeks of September. I mean, they might even beat up on Colorado if Colorado doesn't tend to pan out like we maybe some hope it will. Um, and then you're really talking about that second half of the season when they should be in full, like, train is going full speed down the tracks. That's when they hit their first big game with Notre Dame. And you're right, they do have that tough schedule to finish out. But I think if they gain that positive momentum through those first six games, I think you're going to see USC go on a tear. Little read ahead here, but I have USC going to the college football playoff. I think they are going to
So
be
do I. Yeah.
a very good team this year. I would be shocked, actually, if we don't see them in a very prominent position, like going into the college football playoffs where people are starting to really believe that they can go all the way and win the title game. Whether that happens or not, we'll see, but it wouldn't shock me if USC is undefeated coming out of the regular season, truly. That also leans into my over. My over is not USC, so USC's win total is 9.5. I might sprinkle it, but the line is minus 175, so there's really no value there. If you can get it at 10, I think 10 is a reasonable at even. I see maybe a one or two, like one loss really for USC at most. And I think if you're talking 12 games, USC, I think they don't lose more than two games this year. So if you can find a better line, that would be my over pick. Otherwise, I also like um, Utah. I know I've been kind of a Utah homer for the past like year on this podcast, and homer maybe is a bad word because I've never been to the state of Utah, let alone gone to the college. But I think if you look at their schedule, Utah has a tough couple starting games. They also have a Thursday game to start out this coming week.
Yeah,
Um,
against Florida and Cam Rising is iffy for that game.
yeah,
The line opened at 10. I believe it's now down to 4.5.
yes. So if they can survive those first two games against Florida and Baylor, um, I don't think they'll have as tough a time coming down the stretch. I think their toughest game, because they don't play USC this year, I think their toughest game is probably like Oregon or Washington later in the year. But Utah's very good at handling those games when it comes down to it.
I don't. I think the Pac-12 in the top half might be the most interesting division in college football.
I would agree. I would
'Cause I think
definitely agree.
there's 5 teams when you look at USC, Oregon, Washington, Oregon State, and UCLA. Those 5 teams are all going to be like eight. They're on paper they're 8-4, 9-3 sort of teams.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a really interesting conference this year, and it's such a shame that it's like not going to exist in this form, because all of these teams have upward potential, as programs, and you're going to lose, 4 of those teams to the Big Ten, and then we'll see what happens with Oregon State. But speaking of those teams, my over is Oregon State. Oregon State, I think their win total right now sits at 8.5, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Um, I think this could be a 10-win team. Their schedule sets up pretty favorably. I think they're still being slept on despite how good they are this year. They're going to play with a chip on their shoulder. They get DGA Uiagalelei to come in with a lot less expectations on him and a lot of talent on the defense. So I think overall, the beginning of their schedule sets up well because they get San Jose State. They go to them, but it's after that team gets dog walked by USC, so they'll get a look at them, which is not typical for like an Power Five, non-Power Five opener. Then they get UC Davis and San Diego State to lead them into conference play. But the nice part about their schedule is that they split the tough teams. So they get Utah that looks like week 5. UCLA week 7. Then they get Arizona, Colorado, and Stanford in the middle before they have to catch Washington and Oregon. But they don't play USC. So I think at even at 8-4, you're basically picking them to lose to every one of Utah, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, and you get 3 of those teams at home, including a rivalry game. And the only one you have to go on the road for is your rivalry game against Oregon. So it's a very nice schedule set up for Oregon State. They're ranked 18th, so I think the public is I say the public is like the lay college football fan probably knows nothing about Oregon State, but I think people who understand the sport are very high on them. So I just have a tough time seeing them going any less than 9-3.
Who's your under?
My under is going back to my sheet here. My under is Washington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is all like I think Washington is very much they're a top 10 team, but this all comes down to like how do you feel about Michael Penix, and
Yes.
whether or not you think last year was an anomaly because he was very very good last year, and I have a hard time. They have to go 10-2 to hit this over, and it's just in this division year to year, in this conference year to year, um, it's so hard to do that consistently. They catch. I'm going to their schedule right now, but they get. I mean, they open with Boise State, which is not easy. Granted, the game's at home. They catch Oregon in the middle of the season, but they have to go to USC, to Oregon State. They get Utah at home, but at the back half of the season, they finish the year with at USC, at home against Utah, at Oregon State, and then they get Washington State at home in the rivalry game in the last one before they leave the conference. That is not easy to navigate all of that with, at a minimum, only losing 2 of those games. And that's assuming they beat Oregon at home early in the year. It feels like an uphill sled to get to 10-2 for Washington. I think 9-3 is perfectly respectable, but it's under the number. And so I'm not as high on Washington as a top 10 team as everybody else is. So give me Washington at under. I think that maybe they sneak just under. Like I said, I think 9-3. They're still a very good team, and that's a top 25 team. But it's just I'm not as high on them as I think everybody else is.
I don't hate the pick. I'm going with Cal here actually. So I'm staying. I'm changing it up from some of my other picks where I think the worst team is the under team here. Cal last year went 2-10. I don't think there's been like massive improvement from last year. And I think this is kind of skewed because their schedule, their win total's 5.5 right now. So they start off playing North Texas at North Texas, and then 2 weeks later they play Idaho, right? So reasonably, I think Cal can handle those two games. I just look ahead at their schedule, and I don't see another three wins, really 4 wins to get them over the win total of 5.5. To get them. I don't see Cal going to a bowl game. That's this bet. Like, let's be honest. They play Auburn, they play Washington, they play Oregon State, Utah, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington State. Like, Cal is not as good a team as people think. They've made improvements, if that makes sense. I don't see Cal going anywhere this year. I don't see him in a bowl game. So 5.5 to me is way too high. I think they probably reasonably get 4. So I'm going with Cal on the under. I just don't see any sort of massive improvement that leads me to believe that Cal is ready for a bowl game and ready to get to a bowl game and therefore worthy of an overbet here. So I'm going with the under.
Yeah, I don't hate that. There's a handful of teams here that like you think about under in the bottom of the conference, and they're all because this conference is so not top heavy, in the sense that we traditionally think of top heavy, but the top 5 teams are so good that there's going to be a lot of like non bowl eligible at the bottom, and so I think it's a smart play. I think it just Cal has an uphill battle to get to 6-6, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Your basement is it?
I mean, it's Stanford. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. Look, not trying to dog on anybody. Stanford's just not a good program for football. I will say that there's some cool games coming in there. I think Stanford versus Hawaii in the beginning of the year is going to be a fun one at Hawaii, 10 p.m. on a Friday. That'll be fun. But then Stanford has like USC, Oregon, like they're going to get crushed. I think the fun games, if you're a Stanford fan, you look forward to the Hawaii game. You probably take one away from Sacramento State, and maybe you can upset Colorado at Colorado if Colorado truly is not yet a good program. I think Colorado will be. We haven't really talked about that much. I know with Dion there's been a lot of hype, a lot of talk. I think Colorado's top expectation should be bowl game. I think their bottom expectation should be going over their win total, which I see at like 4.5. I don't not 3.5. Not many people
Yeah.
believe in Colorado. I am not going to be a doubter of Dion until he shows me a reason to doubt him. And I think Stanford's schedule is much harder than Colorado's, so that's why I went with Stanford. But I don't know that Colorado will be that much better if we're truly talking honest takes here.
Yeah, no, I was because a lot of people are picking are fading Dion.
I
I
don't like that. That seems either to me like a hater pick or like people are just not believing. I think he's a good coach. I just think
I do
Colorado
too.
lacks the talent.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a couple years in Colorado. But I think more than anything, like people who are picking against Colorado should be picking it because of their schedule, not because of Dion, and just
Right.
because they brought in talent. Like Shadur is a good quarterback. Travis Hunter is an All American. So like they have dudes, and Travis Hunter's going to play a lot. It's just more they open at TCU, then get Nebraska and Colorado State at home. Nebraska is going to be better under Matt Rule, and Colorado State's a pretty good non Power 5 team in a rivalry game. That's not easy, and then they get into their Pac-12 schedule, which is brutal up front. They have to go to Oregon, then get USC at home before they go to Arizona State, who could be pretty good under Kenny Dillingham. Then they get Stanford at home, but they finish with some tough games. UCLA, Oregon State at home. So there's a possibility that they win 2 or 3 games. I think if they go to a bowl game, he should be a coach of the year candidate.
Yes.
Because of the amount of roster turnover and the expectations and living up to them in the first year is going to be so difficult to do that I think Dion should be really considered that way. if this team somehow ends up 6-6, because that would mean probably they beat Nebraska, beat Colorado State, and pick off at least 2 to 3 of, or probably 3 of Arizona State, Stanford, Arizona, and maybe Washington State, and then somewhere in there you've got to win another game against a team that's a preseason ranked team. So that would be like a TCU, Oregon. Both of those games are on the road at UCLA. At Oregon State at home, which would be kind of crazy. So like their schedule is not easy even to make a bowl game, regardless of
Right.
the fact that it's Colorado. Never mind, what Deion's got as far as expectations and the pressure on him. So I don't think they're going to be the worst team in the Pac-12. I think you're right. I think that's Stanford, because Stanford's schedule I think might arguably be just as hard, if not harder. Hawaii is not an easy game by any means, given the fact that all the emotion that they are going to have riding with them. Then they get USC in week 2, which is a traditional spot, but they're going to lose that game. Sorry. The only win that really you can pencil in for Stanford is Sacramento State at home.
Right.
But everybody else, like what you would consider the teams that they could beat, if you're picking 4, Arizona, Colorado, Washington State, and Cal, they get only 2 of those games at home. And one of them is Cal at the end of the year. So there's a really decent chance they only have like 2 wins. So I think, yes, Stanford's my pick as well for the bottom of the Pac-12. And I think Colorado there's a chance they go under, but I don't think they're going to be the worst team.
I don't disagree with you, to be honest. I don't disagree. All right, well, let's move on. We'll go to everybody's favorite conference where it just matters more, the SEC. Let's go conference champion first.
I am going to go against the Tide, or I'm going to go against the public and with the Tide. I told you I was very high on Alabama in the last hour.
Oh.
And I just there's not a lot of value in picking Georgia. And Andy Staples has been on this bus, and I'm a big believer in it. Nick Saban is weirdly very happy right now.
Yes, that does scare me.
Recent press hits, he has been very happy, and so people have talked about it, like some of the media day interviews and stuff with some of the guys from the team. I think that he has gotten them to a point where they feel really disrespected, and with the amount of talent that they just have on the roster, this all comes down to how do you feel about the quarterback room?
Right.
And I think they've probably got 4 guys who you could see a world where this is a top 5 team or a playoff team with 4 different quarterbacks in their quarterback room. If Milroe figures out how to pass, they're a playoff team possibly. If Tyler Buchner is the person that everybody thought he was going to be as a recruit, they're a playoff team. Ty Simpson, if he just manages the game with the running backs and the offensive line they have, they're a playoff team. And then the freshman that they have, whose name is escaping me as well, all of the Alabama message boards are super high on this kid. And if he just turns into a freshman phenom, they're a playoff team. So I think the biggest question you have that goes back to last year are their receivers, Ja'Cory Brooks. I think TJ Ford is the other. They have one speedster, but not the same amount of talent on the outside. Just not very promising. But their running backs, are going to be good. Their offensive line is going to be one of the best in the country. They returned Dallas Turner, who's an All-American, and they always have dudes on defense. So I am high on Alabama because it feels like the first time, not Nick Saban making it up, but the first time in a long time where Alabama, everybody has sort of written them off before this season has even started. And I think they show up against Texas, and it's a very physical game. I think last year was a wake-up call for them, and you would say that Alabama has arguably gotten worse and Texas has gotten better, but I think Alabama shows up in that game, and they come out with their hair on fire and punch Texas right in the nose, and that really everybody sort of gets a wake-up call. They don't catch Georgia on the schedule, so they won't see them until the championship game. I think if they navigate the SEC West, and they were really close to doing it last year. I think the 2 games they lost were 1-score games. And so if they get through their SEC West schedule, which I think on the whole is probably pretty average this year. Not I say average compared to other seasons in the SEC West. Like there's not 2 to 3 teams that you could really see winning that division. I think
Hmm.
Texas A&M could take a big step forward. I think Auburn's going to be better than people think. But and LSU is obviously there, but I think overall there's some opportunity for Alabama to come back and have a really good year. So I'm going to go against the public here. I'm going to take Alabama just because of the value. They're plus 220, which I think is a good number for Alabama. Obviously, Georgia's going to be really good. I have a hard time seeing how they don't make the playoff at a minimum. It's so hard to go back, like to repeat 3 times. And I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia. This isn't a knock on Georgia. I think they're probably going to win the SEC. But if you're going to ask me to put, any sort of money on it, Virginia, where you can legally gamble, not North Carolina. I got to say that for these preview episodes, just to make sure nobody thinks that I'm gambling illegally. Yeah, the value here is on Alabama.
I don't hate it. I do hate my own pick. I am going with Georgia. I think Georgia wins every game they play this year. I don't think they've regressed at all. I don't think they've lost a significant amount. I think whatever they did, 6 years ago to start this chain of recruiting where they have like the most oppressive NFL level defense of all time, is impressive. And I think it's worth noting that I I don't see a loss for them on the schedule truly. So that's really the driving factor behind why I think Georgia comes out on top. Granted, once you get to the SEC championship game, it's anybody's game, right? As we've seen in the past, typically actually with the SEC championship game, a lot of times, especially Alabama, Georgia, the team that wins that game doesn't go on to the national title championship victory. I think we've seen that twice now where Alabama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Alabama, and then they didn't win the title game. I think really Georgia's only true like, oh shit, maybe they lose game would be at Tennessee on November 18th. I'm sure if they're smart, that'll be a night game. But I don't see Georgia losing to anybody else before that. I mean, their schedule's not hard. They don't play Alabama. They don't have LSU. So their hardest team, I mean, is Mississippi maybe the week before Tennessee, but that's at home, so it's hard to see they'll stumble there. So I think Tennessee's your only real chance you see Georgia lose. I think Georgia walks into the SEC championship game, and then I think they beat whoever's there. I will say, I actually think LSU might beat Alabama, and win the SEC West, and then make it to the SEC championship game. I think LSU is ready to take that next step. I think Jaden Daniels is a very good quarterback. There's been a lot of hype about how he's been performing in camp and how he's ready to go. And Alabama, I just need to see it. I 100% believe that they can be the perennial contender that they have been in the past. I just need to be shown that they can do it because, like, the past 3 years have been really lackluster from them. And I think Alabama can get back to where they were in that level of prominence, but I've got to see it because Georgia is just that oppressive on defense, and LSU is not going to be a walk in the park either. And then, A&M might pull something out where maybe this is finally their year that we've been talking about for the past couple of years, So I think the West is a lot more competitive. I think that makes it much more difficult for these teams to progress and not lose to each other. I think LSU probably comes out on top of it out of all of that. As opposed to Alabama. But I'm excited to see. I think the SEC West specifically is probably the most competitive sub conference. So I guess we'll kind of see who
Yeah,
is.
I think as
Yeah.
much as people are down on Alabama, and a lot of that is Bryce Young did keep them in a lot of these games, but
Yes.
they were 10-2, and their 2 losses were Tennessee at Tennessee on that crazy game with the field goal where
Hmm.
they carried the goalpost to the river, and then the overtime loss at LSU. So they still went 10-2 with 2 road losses against 2 top 10 teams. That really could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I'll say for my pick is that you could also make the argument that Nick Saban should have and would have beaten Georgia every single time he's played them if he would have had John Mechie and Jameson Williams. And like that's like we there's a lot of we forget about that because Georgia has won 2 national titles and they made it they won it running away when they played Alabama the second time. but that was without both of their starting receivers, and they didn't play Georgia last year. Um, so you can make the case that Nick Saban has still gotten the better of Kirby Smart pretty much every time he's played him, besides the fact that he didn't have the talent that he thought he would have. So I think Alabama's being slept on. I think you're right. I think Georgia's still the most talented team. I don't think they're going to take a step back. Like I said, I have a very hard time seeing how they don't make it to even the national title game, and a very hard time seeing how they don't make the playoff, even if they lose the SEC championship game. So yeah, I'm looking for value here, and I think that what obviously Georgia's going to have to like this. How long can this run really go on? Even 3 national titles in a row would be something even Saban hasn't done, and I just think it's so hard to do with a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. I think those are the only questions. Some people say that bringing in Mike Bobo for Todd Monken isn't as big a deal. I think it is because of just the amount of turnover and getting on the right page early is a question mark, and it's the only question mark for Georgia. They'll be better on the outside than I think they have been in a long time. Definitely throughout these 2 title runs. I think besides like Pickens didn't play that year that they won their first national title, and last year obviously everything sort of went up the middle with the tight ends with Washington and Brock Bowers in the run game. So it'll be interesting to see how they come out offensively. But I think you're right, and it's not, it's a smart pick. I'm excited for this SEC season because I think there's a lot of unpredictability.
Yeah, and just to get ahead of the game here, my over is Georgia at 11.5. I don't think Georgia loses a single game. I think Tennessee gives them a run for their money. They still come out on top. I think Georgia goes undefeated in the regular season and kind of starts rolling into the playoffs. So I'll let you go with your over.
I've got 2. I'm going to go with 2 because I wasn't sure if you were going to pick either of these teams. But they're.
I will say here's who I like as well: Tennessee over, LSU over, Alabama over, which kind of contradicts them, right? Because they play each other and they kind of they all kind of tie into each other. So, but Alabama at 10.5, I could see them being a 1 or 2 loss team. LSU is at 9.5. I could see LSU having 10 wins easy. Tennessee, I believe, is at 9.5 as well. Yep. I could see them having 10 wins. I think these teams beat each other up, but when you look at the SEC overall, I think LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, like playing anybody else, I don't see anybody else beating those 4 teams. So I think they beat up on each other, but I think they're all probably at 9 to 10 wins each.
I'm going to talk about 3 other teams here because it's interesting. Those are the teams you're high on. I'm low on it. LSU. We'll get there in a second.
Okay, I'd
which
love to
means
hear.
that I have other teams stepping into that void, and I'll rattle them off in an order. My favorite under or total right now in the SEC is Kentucky. Over
Really?
over 6.5. I think that their transfer portal activity and some of their recruiting has fixed some of the problems that they had last year. I think they had a lot of expectation, and obviously Will Levis and co didn't really live up to that. Besides, going down to the swamp, beating Anthony Richardson in Kentucky in a ranked game, or Anthony Richardson in Florida in a ranked game. They kind of had a lackluster finish to the season, but their non-conference schedule is a joke. It's Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, and Akron. And then the tough games, quote unquote, that you would consider on their schedule, the majority of them are at home. They get Florida at home, they get Missouri at home, they get Tennessee at home, they get Alabama at home. So they're at a total of 6.5 for this team. Like Florida is a very winnable game. They get Vanderbilt on their schedule because they're in the East. There's a really good chance that they give Tennessee a hell of a fight at home. And then their 2 road games later in the season are at Mississippi State and at South Carolina, games they might be favored in. So overall, like 6.5, being barely better than a bowl team with the schedule that they have, with what should be 3-0 and really 4-0 because they go to Vanderbilt in their first SEC game. If they beat Florida week 5, they could be 5-0 heading into a game against Georgia that they'll lose. But then you've got to find 2 wins on the rest of the schedule, and they get Missouri, Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Louisville. Granted, 3 of those games are on the road, but to find 2 wins in there is not hard for that team. Liam Cohen's a good offensive coordinator. They get Devin Leary from NC State, who's a good quarterback that just got hurt last year. They're better on the outside than they've been in a long time. I'm really high on Kentucky. The other 2 teams I have, Auburn, I think is their win total is, I want to say 6.5. No, 7. I think Auburn's going to be better this year. I think they had a lot of dysfunction in that program. Brian Harsin was not a good coach. They switched to Cadillac Williams. It's a tough division. It's an uphill sled. But the one thing we do know about good Hugh Freeze, regardless of his propensity to hire adult workers, is that he is a good football coach. And I think they have the back half of their schedule in the SEC is not that difficult. They get Mississippi State at home, go to Vanderbilt, to Arkansas, and then New Mexico State at home before they get Auburn. That's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously Arkansas is a tough game sandwiched in there, but at 7 wins with them playing UMass and Cal up front and Samford, they've got a good shot to be a 7-5, 8-4 sort of team. And everybody looks up and goes, "Wow, that was a solid season for Hugh Freeze," and he hasn't even started paying people to come to school. So I think they're going to be good. And I will say too, I'm also higher, I think, a little bit on Texas A&M to be better than they have been in the past couple seasons. I don't know what their win total is. Give me a second to look that up. But I think overall, I think last year was obviously a tough season. I think the Miami game is going to be really interesting, just because those are two programs where it feels like both might hit the panic button if they lose. 9 wins is a lot, especially in the SEC West, which is why this is probably my third favorite, because they have to go to Ole Miss, they have to go to LSU, they have to go to Tennessee, and then they catch Auburn. They have to go to Miami. None of those games are easy, and those are 5 very toss-up games for them. And really, I say very toss-up. It's more like they're going to be underdogs probably at LSU, at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at home against Alabama. So if they're underdogs in 4 of those games, and they need to get to 9 wins, that's difficult. Which is why I like this one the least. But yeah, my over is Kentucky. I'm high on them.
So we are actually on opposite sides here. My under for this year is Auburn.
I could totally see it. Like this is going to be a project. Like Brian Harsin, it's hard to understate how bad a job Brian Harsin did as the coach of Auburn. And it really, to me, it wasn't his fault. That was just one of the worst hires in the SEC in the past. He put it up there with like Butch Jones, like some of the worst hires in the conference in the past 2 decades. I think Brian Harsin is one of those.
Yeah, so here's my problem, right? Hugh Freeze, I don't think is a very good leader.
Yeah, I didn't say that. I think he's a good like play caller and a good offensive coach.
I think in the SEC you need that though. I think you need that cult of personality. I think you need that Kirby Smart, that Nick Saban. I think he is a cult of personality for all of the wrong reasons. I was joking with my good friend who is an Auburn fan about. I literally said it would be funny if you hired Hugh Freeze, and then like a week later they hired Hugh Freeze, and I was like, "What in the hell is going on?" I am not high on Auburn. I need Auburn to show me that they're not incompetent, and I don't think that Hugh Freeze is the guy that's going to be a leader in the SEC and kind of show these kids how to go forward. Brutally honest, I know that's very harsh, but I see I'm looking at Auburn's schedule, and I see the opposite. I see it very possible that they lose to Cal in week 2. I mean, not really, but right. Even if they don't, let's assume they start off 3-0 against UMass, Cal, and Stanford. Then they go to Texas A&M. Then they have Georgia. Then they have LSU. Then they have Mississippi. Then they have Mississippi State, who is a better team than they are. The next win after the first 3 wins where they're dog walking bad teams is Vanderbilt. And then I don't think they beat Arkansas. And I don't think they beat Alabama. And it wouldn't shock me if they lose to one of these 4 teams, Stanford, Cal, UMass, and New Mexico State. I don't see 6.5 wins out of this team. And I think they'll continue their regression a little bit under dicey leadership, to be honest with you. I know that's shitty, but I think Auburn making a bowl game would actually maybe surprise me a bit. I don't know that they get to 6, and their total is 6.5. From a leadership standpoint, I need to see that Auburn is not in a vacuum, and players can only do so much. And I know it's just a head coach, right? Because you got O coordinators, D coordinators. You got other leaders, right? But I truly think that Auburn might be in a tough spot, and I think it's very, very possible that we revisit your worst hire comment and immediately throw Hugh Freeze in that category.
There's a ton of variance. I'll give you that. My logic comes from if they beat the teams that they're supposed to beat on paper, which includes Cal, they go five. That's 5 wins, and so
Correct. I am risking it basically under the assumption that they don't really have many conference wins at all.
yeah, and so the other two games you have on the schedule is Mississippi State and Arkansas, which is it's tough sledding, assuming they don't pick off one of the teams that they're going to be underdogs against. No, I agree. Like I said, I think it's a variance play, and it's why it's not my favorite. My favorite is Kentucky because it's a much more stable program. Yeah, I everything. You're right. As a leader, Hugh Freeze has not been a good guy. But I feel like his teams have played and played well, even at Liberty. Obviously, he was able to get Malik Willis. They were much more competitive than they are now. So I look at the product that he's put on the football field. I think it'll blow up spectacularly at some point. Like, don't get me wrong. But I think Auburn is kind of like, you know what, we'll take the risk. If we're competitive and it blows up, we're kind of fine with that. As opposed to like hiring Brian Harsin, who's going to say and do the right things, but we're going to go 5-7, and then we're going to make up some sort of fake accusation to try to fire him for cause and not pay his severance. I think Auburn's in a weird spot. I look at what Hugh Freeze has done in the past, and I think there's like they're always talented defensively. They have high level recruiting talent. I think that there's a chance that they're decent, but yeah, I like that we're locked up on that one because they might be the most interesting team in the West, just as far as like what they're Peyton Thorne had a good season at Michigan State, but that was largely Kenneth Walker, and then majorly regressed last year. So if he can turn into the guy he was 2 years ago, there's a chance they're decent. Obviously, it could also implode. So,
yeah,
it'll be interesting.
We'll see. All right, let's transition over to what I might argue is one of the more
basement.
Sorry. Yes,
basement.
Thank you for catching me.
We're both Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Yeah, Vanderbilt, the team that should not be in the SEC. Vanderbilt, okay, let me make this argument. I made this argument last year. Vanderbilt should genuinely consider moving away from the SEC. It would open up a spot for a more competitive team that is more suited to be in that conference, right? This is really a tier 1 conference within the FBS. Mm-hmm. Vanderbilt could go to the ACC, could go to the Pac-12 if it still exists, could go to the Big 10, the Big 12, and they could do well. They could start to build a little momentum, right? You can't go into the SEC like this and just be dog walked in football and expect to like get better over time. No one wants to go to Vanderbilt to play because they know they're going to get crushed by Georgia or Tennessee or Kentucky or South Carolina every year. Like it must be very frustrating for the players. And I'm not saying they're a bad program, but there's just been no momentum. I think Vanderbilt could easily benefit from a change of scenery in conference to maybe be more competitive down the road, and they just refuse to do it. It's just shocking to me.
I think the SEC keeps them there for 2 reasons. I think it's one, they do actually like having a tomato can to kick around, and let's not forget I took them over 2.5 last year on our preview show, and you laughed at me, and that hit in October.
No, you were right. I laughed because it was a smart bet. The way you logically laid it out made sense. They would get their first 3 wins, and then they would not win another game. And you were on the money. They won their first 3 games, and they lost every single one after that.
So I think this year Vegas is smart. They set the total a notch above that. Their total is 3.5. They will be the worst team, but I think they also have a chance to go over again. I'm looking at their schedule right now. They get Hawaii at home, which they're favored at by 17.5 points. Then they get Alabama A&M. They would have to beat Wake, assuming they lose every other game in their schedule. They'd have to beat Wake and UNLV. I'm not going to take it this year because I don't think they beat Wake. Like I said earlier, I'm high on Wake. But yeah, I think I was going to say 2 reasons. One, they like having them as a tomato can, and 2, they're very competitive in baseball, and they put a lot of guys into the pros. I know that really means nothing because we don't consider baseball to be like a revenue generating sport, but they do. I think they do like having Vanderbilt has a very established presence in baseball, both collegiately and in the major leagues, and I think that's why they keep them around.
Yeah, I get why, right? There's also the money every time an SEC team makes the college football playoff and they get that money that gets evenly dispersed throughout the conference. So like there is a financial benefit to being in the SEC. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you are die hard locked in on Vanderbilt football, you should be a number one advocate for getting the hell out of the SEC because you need room to grow, you need time to grow, and you're not going to have growth when you're just getting the shit kicked out of you every year.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we can move on.
All right, let's go. So I was saying before, let's go to the G5. So we're going to do this with G5 and Independence. We'll talk a little bit about them both. And we'll kind of give our best worst teams and who we like coming out of the group of five. I still think it's some of the best college football, because it's so much fun. Like, it's not as elite, quote unquote, but there's something about a MAC game, and the AAC is getting very competitive. I think you'll start to see the AAC as of next year become much more prominent as the G5 gets guaranteed a slot in the college football playoff, right? I think you'll see the ACC kind of come out on top there. And we'll talk about this next year, but I have high hopes for a bunch of schools as we kind of go on. But let's get into it.
Fun.
Yeah. Mike, give me like your top 2 to 3 teams in the G5, and then you could throw in Independence if you want.
Yeah, so the best I'll go best non-Power 5 team. To me, it's still Notre Dame. Obviously, that's a very square pick, but I also like their over. Though what's working against it, Notre Dame is a tough schedule, but I think Sam Hartman's a really good quarterback. Sam Hartman has thrown for more touchdowns the past 2 years than anyone has ever thrown for at Notre Dame. Brady Quinn, I think, holds the record with 38. I think Sam Hartman has thrown 38 and 39 touchdowns in the past 2 years. Sam Hartman's a really good quarterback, and that was the one thing that they were clearly lacking, especially early in the season last year. Let us also not forget that they kicked the ever-loving crap out of Clemson in South Bend at the end of the season. They were trending in the right direction at the end of last year, not in the wrong direction. Having watched this team play in person and having been on the sidelines watching them warm up, they have dudes, like tons of dudes. And I think they're going to be pretty good. If Sam Hartman can unlock this offense, they're going to be possibly in the college football playoff conversation, which I think is, not necessarily where I think everybody slots them in. I think, for the most part, if you had to pick a dart throw at the end of the season, you would say somewhere between like 8 and 15. I think they have a chance to be better than that. Like I said, it's a tough schedule, but they do get Ohio State at home. They get USC at home. They have to go to Clemson. Those are their 3 toughest games, but 2 of them are at home against what we would consider to be playoff teams. And if they pick off either Ohio State or USC, I think expectations change drastically. And Sam Hartman's the kind of guy that can do it. So they have some tricky games in there. At NC State could be a difficult one. At Duke is not a walk in the park. Louisville should be better this year. That game is also on the road. And then they get Wake Forest at home, who I'm obviously high on, which should be interesting with Sam Hartman playing against his old team. So Notre Dame overall, even if they lose the 3 games they're supposed to lose, they'll be favored in every other game. And I just have a hard time seeing 8-4 out of this team. I think they pick off one of Clemson, USC, and Ohio State, which might, if it's the last 2 of those teams, might throw the college football playoff into some sort of wackiness. So yeah, I think Notre Dame is my best non-Power 5 team. I also like their over.
Okay, I don't hate it. Look, I'm going to talk about the the G5 conferences more probably than the independents. I think Notre Dame's a fine team. I don't see them going to the college football playoff. I'll get that out of the way. I think there's a few like things they're just kind of missing. I like Marcus Freeman. I think he's a very good coach. I don't think it's a coaching issue. I just think like how you've drafted or how you've recruited in the past couple of years, I just don't see a match between what they're going to put on the field versus what they're going to like expect, right? I don't see them beating USC. I don't see them really beating Clemson unless Clemson is much worse than they are. or unless Clemson is much worse than we think they will be this year. I certainly don't see them beating Ohio State. I think they could even lose to like Wake Forest late in the year, or maybe Pitt sneaks up on them. Like I think they have one of those, maybe NC State, right, where you have like a sneak up game and they just like shit the bed, like Notre Dame typically does about once a year. So I am not high on Notre Dame. I think they're fine. I think they're obviously the best independent team. I don't think Navy is very good at all. I don't think Army is very good at all. But yeah, so as far as conferences though, for the G5, I think we are set up for a very interesting series. I think the AAC is easily the best G5 conference. UTSA is going to be, yeah. I think the AAC is better
Yeah, no,
than,
I'm saying I think the Fun Belt is probably second.
yeah,
In,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 100%. Maybe Mountain West you could argue. I think Conference USA and MAC are a little lower, but of those, I think the AAC is the most interesting because UTSA and Tulane I think are really going to have to battle it out. Because you're not just battling it out for like this year, you're starting to battle it out really for name recognition and prominence for next year to prepare yourself to be in the college football playoff, if that makes sense. UTSA came up real quick from basically not existing. They got established and then quickly became a very prominent school. But I think if you look at the AAC, right, and I'm sorry, I mentioned Navy as an independent school. They're in the AAC. But I think if you look at the AAC, UTSA and Tulane is a very, very interesting competitional matchup. I also think that SMU is a pretty good team and ECU is a pretty good team that could sneak up in there. Memphis is not a bad team either. I think it's going to be highly competitive, and I think what you're going to look for from the AAC is really someone to start to try and establish momentum for next year where you can get in the college football playoff. I think looking at the rest of the conferences, Sun Belt will be a lot of fun this year. I think there's a lot of good teams within the Sun Belt that could really like make things interesting, I guess. I don't think they're as good as the AAC, but I think Troy comes out on top um, of the Sun Belt. I think they're a great team. They kind of stand out to me. JMU also in there. They had a pretty like breakaway season last year. I'm interested to see what JMU is going to kind of do going forward, but I think Troy is probably the best team out of that conference. Um, if we're talking Mountain West, I actually like Air Force. I think their Air Force is going to be a sneaky good team this year. I think they'll definitely win both games against the other academies. But Air Force is keep an eye on Air Force. Air Force's passing game last year was shockingly good, and I think we could start to see like some people start to think that the Air Force Academy could be that 12th team in the college football playoff as of next year because it's guaranteed to one of the G5 teams. And then if you look down, I think the MAC, I think Toledo is probably the best team in the MAC. They're, MAC is MAC is MAC, right? It's your typical like Tuesday at 6 p.m., Wednesday 6 p.m. conference. But it's a fun one. It's sometimes it's hard to keep track. Toledo's not too bad either. So I'll probably stick with them. I'm not probably going to bet it, but I like Toledo. And then I think Conference USA. I'm not big on Conference USA. I think Liberty is a very good team. I think UTEP's a very good team. I think we see Western Kentucky or oh god, I lost my train of thought. Western Kentucky, UTEP, or Liberty come out of all of that. I think Jackson State really falls off in Conference USA, unfortunately, with the loss of Dion. So I don't think
Jacksonville State.
Jacksonville State, sorry.
Yeah.
I was
sorry.
like,
Jacksonville State is in the whatever the Southern Conference or whatever. HBCU conference.
Yeah. Jacksonville State. So, sorry, that was a weird tangent. I read that wrong. But yeah, I think Western Kentucky or UTEP kind of comes out on top. I think UTEP's a pretty good team too. You're starting to see these associated UT teams. So really what it is, it's the same college, University of Texas. They started football programs on all their different campuses. And because it's Texas and it's football, they're all pretty decent.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting. I think the G5 is going to be a fun one. I'll let you go through your picks for the
Yeah,
G5.
really, my oh, wow, sorry, my picks. The my favorite over is UTSA. I think that 8.5 is where they're sitting now. I think people are giving them a chance to go to Tennessee and beat Tennessee in one of those like early G5 upsets that we see every
Mm-hmm.
year, which is certainly possible. They open the season at Houston, which they could very easily win. And they get Army at home in non-conference too, which feels like a game that could help increase their profile because Army draws eyeballs across the country. I think they're better than pretty much everybody else not named Tulane in the in Conference USA, and I think that Tulane they get Tulane at the end of the season. It's at Tulane, but that could very well be like. Do they have a conference championship game?
Tulane, yes,
No,
or
no,
the
just
AAC,
conference.
yes.
Yeah, AAC. Yeah, so that could be like they play back to back weeks because both of those teams could be in the conference championship
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
Otherwise, I don't see a team there that's better than them. So I like eight. Find me 4 losses on this schedule. Like I just don't see it. Even if they lose to, Houston, Tennessee, and Tulane, they would still have to lose to like somebody else, in the conference in order for that to happen. I just don't see it. They're my over. My under is ECU. I know you mentioned them as one of the teams that you think is going to be pretty decent, but their non-conference schedule is not easy. They go to Michigan to open the season, then they go to App State 2 weeks later. They could very well start the season 1-2. They also have to play SMU, who is never an easy game for anybody. They're always like pretty good. And then they travel to UTSA and have Tulane at home in back-to-back weeks, which those will be tough. Their win total's 5.5. I see a world where this team is not very good, and loses a bunch of games. And then my the worst team in Division 1 FBS football, pick because it would be out of the G5 presumably if it's not Northwestern, is or Virginia. To me, it's Charlotte. If you haven't seen any of the press clippings
Yeah.
from Bill Poggi, their new coach, go look this guy up because he is a nut job. He's electric. He's a former high school coach, but he is a nut job. And they could either be like have a bunch of swagger and come out and play way above their head, or this could be just an absolute disaster. And I think I'm leaning towards the second one. Their win total is 3.5. I don't really see where they beat some teams, and I just think this could be one of the craziest stories in college football this season. So, my worst team in the G5 is going to be Charlotte.
Okay. I don't disagree. I'll shy away from shitting on G5 teams as a fan of now 2 G5 teams. All right, Mike, let's transition one last future pick here. Give me the 4 teams in the college football playoff in order.
Oh, in order. Okay.
In order. So remember,
Okay.
this is, and I fucked this up. Remember, we're still in a 14 playoff for this year. I for some reason my mind melted and I thought we were in a 12 team earlier. But 4 teams still. So give me your 4, and then if you want to throw in a pick for week 0, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll also give you my 3 picks for week 0. My playoff in order, I'm going to ride with Alabama. If I pick one of them the championship, I'm going to take them number 1. USC 2. I think we're both high on them. 11-1 Pac-12 champ. Very few blemishes in their schedule. I think they go in at 2. I'm going to take Georgia at 3. They could go 11-1 with a loss in the SEC championship game. I think there's a chance that they come in at 3. And then my 4th, because I picked them to win the conference, I'm going to take Penn State as the 4th team in the playoffs. So I have 2 SEC teams and 2 future Big Ten teams in the playoff with USC and Penn State. And then my week 0 picks, I like Notre Dame minus 20.5 against Navy. This is, how do you feel about Sam Hartman? I feel good about Sam Hartman. Navy's not as good as they've been in recent years. So I'll take Notre Dame to cover a 3-touchdown spread. I also like USC, same vein, minus 31. against San Jose State. I thought about taking the under actually in this game because the total is 66.
Hmm.
And um, San Jose State used to have, who was the quarterback that bounced around forever that was playing there? I can look this up, but he was like a Auburn, Arkansas dude, was like 26 years old. He's not there anymore. And if we think USC's defense is going to be better, even USC by themselves, if they score 56, they still need 10 from San Jose State to hit that number, or more than 10. That feels like an uphill climb. But I'm gonna shy away from that. I'm gonna take USC minus 31. I think they hit this number maybe even by the third quarter, and you see a little bit of Malachi Nelson in the fourth quarter help run this number up. And then I know we both have a soft spot for this team. I'm going to take Hawaii plus 17.5 on the road at
Mm-hmm.
Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
With the emotion, like this goes one of two ways. Either Hawaii is just very distracted by the wildfires in Maui, or this is a community that sort of rallies around this team. I'm going to land on the latter. This is a
Yes.
play with your heart pick, even though they're on the road. If this, I think there's a chance that if this game was in Hawaii, the spread would be 10 points less.
I don't disagree with what you just said either.
So like, yeah. So if because this game's on the road, I think most people are shying away from it. But I think Hawaii has a chance to be way better than last year. Obviously, all the chaos that unfolded with Nick Rolovich and that whole
Yeah.
scenario really affected this team last year. I think they're going to be better. No, it wasn't. No, Rolovich was the year before. Who's the guy that got fired?
I'm blanking on his name, but yeah, I mean, he left the
Brandon?
program and
Yeah,
and just had screwed the program.
yeah. So I think Timmy Chang, hometown hero, or
Yep.
Tommy Chang.
Tommy Ching.
Yeah, I think they'll be better offensively. I like them to hang with Vanderbilt a little bit longer than most people expect. I think Vanderbilt still wins, possibly by 2 touchdowns, but I think they stay under the number.
Timmy, sorry, not Tommy. Timmy.
Timmy. Give me Hawaii plus 17 there.
I like it. I like it. I got a few leans and a few picks, but let me run you down with who I think is in the college football playoff. I think, in order, it looks like this. You know what I'll do? I'll give you my top 11 or 12 teams. But here's who I think makes the college football playoff. Georgia number 1 as an undefeated Georgia. Michigan number 2 as a maybe 1 loss, but probably 0 loss Michigan. I think USC probably has 1 to 2 losses at number 3, and I think Ohio State sneaks in there at number 4, having only lost to Michigan. I think after that, you see Texas very close. I think you then see Florida State, Penn State. I think Alabama is about number 8, just like last year. I think they will stumble. I think that's where we're most opposed on the SEC opinions. And then I think you kind of see LSU, Wisconsin, Clemson, and the rest of the big name guys. I think you see 1, maybe 2 G5 teams in the top 25 at the end of the year. But I think that'll either be Tulane or UTSA, as we've been talking about. I think those are the only 2 really like competitive teams right now in the G5 that can really rival a lot of Power 5 teams. And I think you kind of saw that last year with Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. And you know, we're starting to see the AAC become a little more prominent compared to what people have associated with it in the past. As far as picks, I don't like the Notre Dame pick. I'll be honest with you. A large percent of the money is on Navy, despite only 47% of the bets being on Navy. So I'm staying away from that. That screams someone knows something I don't, although I do not think Navy is a very good team. I'm going with UTEP -1 against Jackson State.
Jackson State or Jacksonville State?
Jacksonville State Gamecocks. I think UTEP's a pretty good team. It's only a 1-point spread, so you're essentially betting that UTEP is going to win. And I'm sticking. I'll stick with you on the Hawaii thing. I think 18's a little high, and I think there's some probably pretty high emotions from that team, knowing they're how distraught the community is, obviously over what horrifically happened over on Maui. And then I lean LA Tech at home against FIU -11.5. Lot of percentage of the money is on that team. Someone knows something I don't. I'll go with the public on that one and kind of ride it out.
Yeah, Hawaii cash is 62%, 51% of the tickets on Vanderbilt. PFF says the value is still in Hawaii. And just to follow up on your comment, 53% of the tickets are in Notre Dame, 67% of the cash is on Navy. So that's just difference of opinion for us.
Yeah, yeah.
If it was like 90%, I would have been scared. 67% is enough for me. Where I just believe in Sam Hartman. That's
Yeah, that's fair. And granted, college football and NFL week 0 or week 1, really, right? This is week 1,
yeah.
is like wildly different, right?
Yeah.
Because NFL is usually a lot of upsets. I would argue college football, I think most teams covered their spreads
Yeah.
pretty handedly last year. So I don't think it's incorrect to say lean towards, at least for these first games, teams that are favored. But yeah, I know Vanderbilt's a good team compared to Hawaii. I still think Hawaii can pull something off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's been our preview for the college football season of 2023-2024. Weekly episodes and all that good stuff coming down the pipe. Like and subscribe, and have a good day.